What historical events are so absurd that they would be too strange for a fiction story or a movie? I got one for you. Ex-Nazi and cult leader pedophile Paul Schaefer was so obsessed with having the children of his compound, Colonia Dignidad, love him and only him that he once took all of the children of the compound to a river where he had someone dressed as Santa Claus floating on a raft. He then shot and killed Santa, in front of all the children, and told them all that Santa's dead. The only holiday we ever need to celebrate here is my birthday. Douglas Bader. RAF flying ace, 23 kills, though he had previously lost both his legs in separate flying accidents. He wore a pair of clunky tin legs. He was shot down over France in 1941. The Luftwaffe were so pleased to have captured him they arranged for the RAF to drop a pair of his legs at a designated time and place, and cleared the sky for the drop to proceed. The RAF did indeed drop the legs as arranged, but since all German fighters and AK had been stood down as arranged, it seemed a waste not to bomb a nearby enemy airfield. Meanwhile, Bader, stumping about on his tin legs, was a great hit with his Nazi captors. At a great party held by the Luftwaffe in his honor, he drank them under the table, excused himself to a third-floor bathroom, shinned down a drainpipe and stumped off into the darkness. He was only recaptured by a German spy in the resistance. For the next 4 years he continually escaped and was recaptured until he was finally sent to Colditz. After the war, there was a great spirit of reconciliation and togetherness between the air forces on both sides. Bader was not convinced. He was invited to address a crowd of assembled now ex-Luftwaffe pilots and began his speech with the words, "Seeing so many of you here today, I am struck by the single thought, I didn't kill enough of you." Battle of Sebase. That time in the 1700s, when the Austrian army got confused, waged a huge battle against itself within its own lines, and lost an estimated several hundred to few thousand men, and a lot of equipment and money, in the process. They then retreated. The Ottomans, whom they were originally intending to fight, showed up 2 days later. The Latrine disaster of Airfort. In 1184, the King of Germany Heinrich VI, held court in the Petersburg citadel in Airfort. On the morning of July 26, the weight of the assembled nobles caused the wooden second-story floor of the Peterskirche to collapse. Most of them fell through into the latrine cesspit below the ground floor, and about 60 of them drowned in liquid excrement. The Toronto Circus Riot of 1855. The fire department and some clowns get into a disagreement at a brothel, and get into a punch-up. The clowns win, but the firemen return to the circus later and start attacking in revenge. The firemen win the day, but violence is stopped when the militia come in. The police do nothing, so the city fires all the police, and I mean everyone, and starts a new police force. Back in the 1780s, after being elected president, George Washington decided to send a letter to Congress that basically said, "Hey, looking forward to working with y'all, this will be exciting." However, George wasn't very eloquent, and was generally busy and stressed, so he asked his friend James Madison to compose the letter to Congress, which James did. When Congress received the letter, they decided to respond in kind, not wanting to slight the new president. They wanted to send back a letter that essentially said, "We're glad you're excited, so are we." They decided there was no one better in Congress to write the letter than their very own, James Madison. So, James writes a response to the letter he wrote in the first place, and Congress sends it to George. George decided to respond with something along the lines of, "Oh, good, I'm excited that you're excited, too." And since his buddy James did such an excellent job with the first letter, George again went to him and had him compose the response. Congress received the letter and, again not wanting to be awkward and ignore the president, decided to reply with yet another letter that basically said, "Hey, we're excited that you're excited that we're excited," and once again, they had James Madison compose the response. So James Madison, future fourth President of the United States, wound up writing himself 4 letters back and forth between George Washington and Congress, and was too embarrassed to tell anyone about it while it was going on. The Korean axe murder incident. Basically, a tree was kinda blocking line of sight near the bridge of no return on the North Korea-South Korea border. A pair of Americans, escorted by South Korean troops, went to trim the tree. North Korean troops took exception to this and came out and told them to stop. They didn't. NK troops called for backup, which showed up with clubs and crowbars, and the North Koreans proceeded to attack the South Koreans and Americans. The 2 Americans were killed, one bludgeoned to death, the other injured with an axe and died of his injuries on the way back to a hospital. North Korea, being North Korea, claimed they were acting in self-defense. A few days later, Operation Paul Bunyan was launched in what was possibly the largest tree pruning operation in human history, with over 800 infantry, including South Korean troops with claymore mines strapped to their chests and remote detonators in their hands, taunting the North Koreans to cross the bridge, 27 helicopters, B-52 Stratofortresses, F-4 Phantom IIS, F-5 and F-86 fighters, F-4ES, F-111 bombers, and F-4C and F-4D Phantoms in attendance. Also the USS Midway carrier was moved to a station offshore. The entire 2nd Battalion artillery was pointed at the DMZ, along with the 71st Air Defense Regiment. Local DEFCON was elevated. 12,000 more troops were ordered to Korea. Nuclear-capable bombers were deployed. A dozen C-130s were lined up, nose to tail at Yokota Air Base in Japan, on standby in case they were needed. Literally 5 minutes into the operation was when the UNC let North Korea know that a UN work party was there in order to peacefully finish the work left unfinished. The tree was successfully pruned to the point of being a stump, which was later replaced with a monument in 1987. British Secret Service created a sabotage device consisting of a dead rat with explosives shoved up its butt. Back then, for safety, if you saw a dead rat, you scooped it up with a spade and chucked it into the furnace. This would ignite the explosives and blow up the building enough that the Nazis would call in their bomb squad for every dead rat. One of 11 children born to Charles and Maria Sachs, Adolf was an extremely accident-prone youth who barely made it to adulthood. At 3 he fell 3 floors down, bashing his head on the stone floor at the bottom. He drank a bowl of acidic water believing it was milk. He swallowed and subsequently passed a large needle. He flew across his father's workshop and was burned badly when a barrel of gunpowder exploded. He fell upon a hot cast iron pan on a stove, burning his side. He frequently slept in a room where varnished furniture was drying, somehow avoiding poisoning and asphyxiation. He was hit in the head with a slate roof tile while walking down the street. He fell in a river and nearly drowned. Then this same child, who some force was failing miserably to unalive, grew up and had the audacity to invent the saxophone. Juan Pujol Garcia. World War II spy who won both the German Iron Cross and Order of the British Empire for spying. He initially approached British intelligence and offered his services, and was refused. Undeterred, he created the persona of a loyal Nazi supporter, became a German agent, gathered a payroll of fake sub-agents, all bankrolled by Germany, persuaded the German Navy to chase a fake convoy, then finally got recruited by the Allies. He finally fed misleading info to the Axis about the D-Day landings, causing them to deploy forces to the wrong locations, even after the invasion had begun. My personal favorite, the Cadaver Synod, in which the dead body of a former pope was disinterred, propped up on the throne, and then formally tried by the church to have his papacy retroactively annulled. Predictably, he was found guilty. Then they chucked his corpse in the Tiber. People are funny animals. Replied comment. You're missing some of the best details. They propped the corpse, which had been decaying for about 7 months at that point, up on the throne of the Pope. They then assigned someone to stand next to the corpse Pope to lean in and listen to him and then answer the questions on his behalf. After they chucked the corpse in the river, it washed up a little while later and people started claiming it could perform miracles because it's the Pope, so why not? This is kind of the reason that, despite being a registered organ donor, the Pope can't have his organs harvested. This also turned public opinion against the living Pope, Stephen IV, because Formosus's crimes had been political and most everyday Catholics didn't really know or much care about it. All they knew was he was the Pope who was very important and his corpse had been desecrated. So Stephen got arrested for it and someone strangled him in prison. When Ivan the Terrible died, he had 2 sons. He had clubbed the third one to death. The older son Fyodor, who was likely mentally disabled, became the puppet of his regent Boris Godunov. The younger son, Dmitry, was sent into exile in Uglich. The accepted historical narrative is that Godunov had Dmitry murdered in Uglich so when Fyodor died, he could usurp the throne. However, after Fyodor died, no less than 3 different people claiming to be Dmitry tried to take power. These false Dmitrys provided Poland with the casus belli to invade Russia, starting a war that killed nearly half the Russian population. The first false Dmitry raped Godunov's daughter and massacred his family. He ended up almost converting Russia to Catholicism and was subsequently beaten to death by a mob and his remains fired out of a cannon in the direction of Poland. The second false Dimitri was possibly a converted Jew. Very little is known about the third false Dimitri, to the point that there may have been a fourth false Dimitri, or possible a false Dimitri. Edit, as some other users pointed out, I forgot to mention a bizarre twist. False Dimitri 2 actually claimed to be false Dimitri 1, the guy that got fired out of the cannon. From the last time this was asked. The marathon at the 1904 Olympics in St. Louis. The first place finisher did most of the race in a car. He had intended to drop out, and got a car back to the stadium to get his change of clothes, and just kind of started jogging when he heard the fanfare. The second place finisher was carried across the finish line, legs technically twitching, by his trainers. They had been refusing him water, and giving him a mixture of brandy and rat poison for the entire race. Doping wasn't illegal yet, and this was a terrible attempt at it, so he got the gold when the first guy was revealed. Third finisher was unremarkable, somehow. Fourth finisher was a Cuban mailman, who had raised the funds to attend the Olympics by running non-stop around his entire country. He landed in New Orleans, and promptly lost all of the traveling money on a riverboat casino. He ran the race in dress shoes and long trousers, cut off at the knee by a fellow competitor with a knife. He probably would have come in first, well, second, behind the car, had it not been for the hour nap he took on the side of the track after eating rotten apples he found on the side of the race. 9th and 12th finishers were from South Africa, and ran barefoot. South Africa didn't actually send a delegation, these were students who just happened to be in town and thought it sounded fun. 9th was chased a mile off course by angry dogs. Note, these are the first Africans to compete in any modern Olympic event. Half the participants had never raced competitively before. Some died. St. Louis only had one water stop on the entire run. This, coupled with the dusty road, and exacerbated by the cars kicking up dust, led to the above fatalities. And yet, somehow, rat poison guy survived to get the gold. Operation Acoustic Kitty. In the 60s the CIA spent months and tens of millions of dollars to surgically bug and then train a cat to sit near foreign officials in order to transmit their private conversations to CIA operatives. The day of the first official test run they release the cat, it wanders into the street and is promptly hit by a taxi. In World War II, British commandos filled a ship with explosives, tried to sail incognito into Germany's largest dry dock but was discovered and fired upon by all the shore batteries. The ship started getting hit again and again, and any single hit could detonate the explosives. They somehow managed to sail the ship at full speed straight into the gate of the dry dock, propelling the ship halfway out of the water and getting it stuck on the gate, making it impossible to tow it away. A small task force then attacked the dock facilities before retreating back, but sadly the ship didn't explode as the timer had failed. The next day a bunch of German officers and officials came to examine the British ship. Meanwhile, half a mile away captured commandos were being tortured for information. To them their mission had failed and now they were facing some brutal treatment. The explosives on the ship suddenly detonated. The explosion was massive, it destroyed the dock, hundreds of soldiers that were sent to secure the dock, and killed all the German officers and officials that had come to inspect it. Those being tortured heard the explosion and got to have the last laugh. I've always wondered why it was never made into a film. There's so many twists and turns, and when you think it's all over there's one more big twist. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage from West Africa to Mecca. Stops by Egypt, and ruined their economy, because he was so rich he made the value of gold plummet. Building a pool in the middle of the desert so that his first wife could swim. Making it to Mecca with an entourage like Aladdin's after the genie. Heading back says sorry I effed up the economy, I will buy my gold back, and heads back to his country like no biggie. Actually, no, this should be a movie. I would pay to watch it twice. Some undeveloped cultures develop rituals in which they'd build fake airports and dress and act like soldiers in order to attract air cargo drops, after witnessing parts of wars. A pope once awarded a chemist a medal for fortifying wine with cocaine. The pope loved cocaine wine. A dying pope once got a blood transfusion from a young child and they both died. In the US during the 90s, people managed to call various restaurants and convince the managers the strip search female employees, and in one case a customer, on behalf of the police. Voltaire once gamed the lottery and made millions. A brown bear named Wojciech once reached the rank of corporal. Operation Mincemeat. The Allies wanted to trick the Axis into thinking that they weren't going to invade Sicily, so they obtained the body of a recently deceased homeless person in London, dressed him up in a British officer's uniform and added a satchel full of top-secret battle plans that gave phony invasion plans somewhere other than Sicily. Then they arranged for the body to wash up on shore in Spain, knowing that the Franco regime would open the documents and pass word on to Berlin and Rome. They tried to make it look like they hadn't opened the documents and returned them, and the body, to Britain, but British spies were able to confirm that Spain had opened the documents and taken the bait.